Welcome everyone to today's DX Cafe event, Contentstack and the Composable DXP. I am Matthew McQueenie from Conobos. If you have any thoughts or questions as we move along, please type them in the chat and we will surface them throughout the discussion. Joining us today is Conor Egan, Vice President of Product at Contentstack. Conor, thanks so much for coming. Maybe if you could just introduce yourself, your background, and what you do at Contentstack.
Yeah, happy to. And thank you very much, Matt, for having us on and discussing this topic. It's definitely an emerging term, this composable DXP, and we're certainly one of the ones that's driving that conversation. So happy to talk through that. A little bit about my background. I've worked in CMS my entire career. So both as an engineering leader, as a product person, going back all the way to sort of the Web 1.0 days, where companies were building CMSs in-house, spending a bunch of time. This was, the Yahoos and the CNETs. The younger audience won't know those names, but for those of us that have been around a little longer, you will recognize that. So I've been trying to solve this problem a long time, both in the low-code space, conventional CMS space, and the trend that I really saw emerging was this idea of headless CMS. And when I saw it, it made total sense to me, given everything that I'd learned in my career. So when the opportunity arose to join at Contentstack, I did that a little over a year ago.
Very nice. Well, and I do have to say, while we're still going strong with the March Madness bracket, everyone get over there because Contentstack is in the Final Four. And voting on that ends on Thursday evening Eastern time before we go to the finals. So always appreciate Contentstack's enthusiasm for that. So let's go a little bit into the origin story of Contentstack. They're very much on the scene right now, but kind of how did they begin and what led the company to where it is today, as we see on the screen, as a pioneer of headless CMS technology?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do that. So even though the company has only been around 5 or 6 years, Contentstack as a product actually started a lot longer before that. So our original parent company, Raw Engineering, was a services company. So we would create digital projects on behalf of our clients, implementing other conventional CMSs. And in around 2011, one of our founders, Nishant, he actually sent an email to the team and said, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. Let's make our own CMS. Here are the outlines of what it needs to do. It needs to be API first. It needs to have a great interface for content editors. It needs an SDK for developers to be able to use that content on the front end. And what he did unknowingly was basically define headless CMS. So the team worked to build out the CMS. We just used it with our own clients initially. But then the software became so successful that it spun out as its own company in 2018, and it's been a super fun ride ever since, serving this market, defining headless CMS, and now graduating to Composable DXP.
It's amazing whenever somebody's in an agency, there's always like, we got to make a product. We got to make a product. So what is it like when you look back and see the amazing happenstance of that email to where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great journey. And I think it's always nice when you're your first customer. So Raw Engineering had the privilege of working with really amazing forward-looking brands. And, if you're responsible for creating the product to get your own work done, so we were essentially our first customer, which really helped. But I have to give a lot of credit to our early customers as well, because, there's always this adoption curve. You start with the early adopters, the companies that are willing to kind of roll the dice on new technology. And now we're graduating into that early majority where, we're being featured in analyst reports. The term headless is now kind of a common term. And so we really got to cut our teeth with these really demanding early adopters. So by the time we have this early majority come in, we have all the features that they expect. We've already made all the mistakes years ago, and it really helps to deliver a product that is very battle tested and ready for the needs of modern marketing teams.
That's great. And I know we have another slide on here. Maybe we can just talk a bit more about, for those, I know it's come on really strong, as you said, in that curve of adoption. But again, pioneering headless CMS technology, and we see the acronym MOC, right? And we see what that stands for below. If you could just give a little bit of insight into that term and some of these benefits that you see as a headless CMS provider.
Yeah, for sure. I can talk about just sort of the composable architecture in general and why I think it is the right solution for large companies. So it kind of models the career path I took, which is in the beginning, you build your own CMS. It's very costly. Every company is basically recreating the wheel themselves. And then emerged all of the monolithic technologies. And this was better than building it in-house for sure. But the downside of that is these big platforms are very prescriptive in how everything works. Like you basically need to use all of it. It's modeled around a particular workflow. It's designed to serve channels that were popular then, which was predominantly web. Now, obviously, we're omni-channel. And then when it comes to composable, you're really getting the best of both worlds because you're not building everything yourself. You're not spending the time to build the CMS or the commerce platform, but you're able to piece them together, basically select the best in breed, write a little bit of integration yourself, but it's kind of the best of both worlds because you're borrowing from all the hard work at all of the great mock providers, and then able to tailor it to your needs. So you're not buying way more than you need. It's very easy to add on pieces. And then you can see some of the benefits. So obviously being cloud-based, there's not a lot of implementation time. You can spin up a customer very quickly. API first means that we can work with all of our other partners really well. And that's kind of another version of headless. And when you put that together, you get the benefits of agility, developer velocity, and then also just being able to meet the needs of your business because we were in this CMS replacement cycle, and everyone's been through this, where you buy a CMS, it has a 3 to 5 year lifespan, and then you're either up against a major version upgrade. I want to go from Sitecore 13 to 15, and it's a 6 to 12 month process, or you're finding an entire new CMS. You're having to relearn that all. And so what headless and composable allows you to do is sort of break that cycle, and it's constant iteration, constant improvement, without being up against those big discontinuities that can be super disruptive to getting your work done.
Well, and interestingly, we'll get into some of the legacy piece, but at least from everything you read and see and working in this, when you move into this this kind of mock way, it's easier to change to other. Not that you want them leaving Contentstack, right? But it makes it a little easier to perhaps plug and play, to use other solutions if one meets your needs more without having to rip and replace as much as you might have in the past. But so on the legacy tech piece, when you were talking about with headless CMS and the benefits, one thing I've heard a lot of, which I had never thought of, is the amount of users who can be in these systems, business users, business technologists, whereas before there might have been 10 to 15 people utilizing a legacy system, actually having login credentials. I've heard that there can sometimes be up to 60 people using these systems in relation to the ratio of one developer. So if you could just talk, if that rings true to you, if what you see, but maybe talk to that and the way legacy tech can hold enterprises back.
Yeah, for sure. So the majority of our users are non-technical users. So, typically we serve two audiences. We serve the developer community and the marketers or the content editors. And if you think about it, our first customer was really the content editor because we would do the implementation, and their experience with our software was basically their review of our software, right? So we had to serve those business users, make sure that they had a really good experience. So we focused a lot on the experience of those users because we're really giving them a superpower, which is enabling them to do something that is very technical and traditionally would involve a lot of code, and be able to do that safely, make changes very often. And that's kind of that back and forth between the developers and the business users. We also have a really great extensibility framework where those developers can build additional tools for the content editors on top of what we've built. So each of our customers is going to have slightly different needs. And they can actually have their developers support them in customizing that experience. So again, we're kind of breaking the build buy paradigm, because you are going to get a lot out of the box with our platform, but there's always that opportunity to build on top of it. So as customers mature and their needs change, the developers can enable their content editors by adding to the platform as well. So you're really not boxed into a single way of working, which is really important, as the landscape changes. And I think something like COVID is a good enough indication as anything that you need to be really agile and ready to change with the market around you.
Absolutely. So we've talked headless, composable, monolith versus composable. From the point of view of, let's say, when a potential customer is coming to you, maybe those who aren't in a composable mindset, and perhaps those who are already doing it or have a pretty good understanding of it, how do you explain this really paradigm shift in a way? I mean, how do you talk to them to get them comfortable with the technology, which then helps to get them into the system? How do you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we see two types of customers come to us. Some are very aware of Composable. They've done their homework, and they're just evaluating us versus other options. But the second part of the audience is those that are coming off of a monolithic CMS. And it's a very different conversation, because there's concerns around, well, how do I work with all these different vendors? How do I integrate? Does my team even have the expertise when maybe I've only been working in a certain type of code for a long time? Do I know what questions to ask? Do I know how to set up this architecture? And so we've put a lot of time into educating companies on how to make that transition, because I'll be the first to admit it can be a little intimidating. And even the paradigms of how you work in composable versus monolithic are very different as well. I talked to some customers that are on legacy systems, and they say, well, they'll ask me a question that will be like, well, how do I lock everyone out of the CMS? And I go, why would you want to do that? And they go, oh, well, when we deploy, we have to send an email to get everyone to log out. We have to copy our entire database to the staging environment. Can't allow anyone to touch it. Copy that all to production. It takes basically a whole day. And I went, oh, right. No, you don't have to do that anymore. So that kind of big paradigm shift where you can constantly be iterating, have multiple people working in the system, that definitely takes some education. And so one of our big efforts this year is to provide a lot of that content that is just not even about Contentstack necessarily, but what are the steps that I do? How do I enable my team? What should I be measuring? What order should I tackle this in? And fortunately, as more and more customers have gone through that, it helps us create the types of materials to help educate our customers better. Because the technology is an important piece of it, but it is just one piece of it.
Absolutely. It's like educating the cable television to cord cutting, right? I mean, it can be a big sea change for in that paradigm. For younger folks, it's a little easier. But I always joke, my parents, they're fine with cable because they can't really figure out how all that stuff works.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
All right. So we see a lot of brands on this screen. Is that sacrilegious, or why are there so many different brands, potentially competitors to yours on this screen, Conor?
Yeah, well, I don't know that this one has any direct competitors, because it's our slide, so that would be a little weird. But no, I mean, the great thing about this is there's a very, very vibrant ecosystem of companies that are supporting this composable movement. So you brought up MOC, that term. There is the MOC Alliance, which maybe some people have heard of. That is an alliance of like-minded companies. Our competitors are in there, our partners are in there. But if you think about, as opposed to buying a CMS from a single company, if you go composable, you're basically buying into the combined innovation of everybody working in this space. So one of these commerce providers or dams may be the leader now, but 2 years from now, there might be someone that disrupts them, and you're not locked in. You can go work with that partner. So we have no problem flashing all these customer logos everywhere, because we really rely on those partners to complete the composable stack. We offer a number of products, but we're never going to offer everything that a customer wants to bring to the table. And we have integrations in our marketplace for most of these. We have documentation. Hey, how do I work with Contentstack and Algolia? So we're very happy to work with all these partners, and there's a growing ecosystem of partners to work with.
Conor, as somebody or as a company who really is a pioneer in this space versus legacy, do you find that on deals or the going after deals, you actually might work with these folks to deliver for the customer in ways maybe before where it was everybody against each other, but for the customer, it might be best to work with a specific DAM or a PIM or to kind of give them the feeling that they're not having to work on 5 different tracks. Like, do you actually work more with these companies than maybe we did in the past?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, someone might be going to a DAM and asking them, hey, do you have a CMS that works well with you? Or vice versa. So we definitely are very involved in solving the customer problem, which is ultimately what we're here to do. We actually also have a program called Care Without Compromise that we pioneered as a way to solve this multi-vendor problem. So what that means is if you, say, are working with one of our DAM partners and us, and you're having some problem and you come to us, we will work horizontally with our partner companies. Because what you can get a situation of is like vendors pointing at each other and saying, oh, that's a Contentstack problem, that's a DAM problem. So we actually work directly horizontally with our partner support teams so that the customer is not getting the runaround, because that is, all the benefits that come with Composable. You are going to work with more vendors, and there can be some downsides to that. So that's why we've put a lot of effort into having those really strong partnerships so that if a customer is having a problem, we can talk to each other. We all have contacts at all of these companies. That really helps to make more of a seamless experience.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting difference from the past. So glad to hear that. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think this is what you were talking to earlier, right? In terms of where the marketplace is from the early market towards the mainstream uptake of these technologies. Do you want to, I know you talk with analysts a lot in your position. Do you want to talk to this one a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So this is what I was referring to, and you may have heard it as crossing the chasm. But there's this moment at which you're no longer just serving these companies that are willing to roll the dice on something new, and you're starting to work with the bulk of the rest of the companies that are maybe lagging a little bit, but kind of don't want to be the first one to try something out. And a good indication that we are crossing that point is when you start to see recognition from the analysts as well. So we actually have a quote on here from Joe over at Forrester, saying that DXPs are really more built than bought now, which I think is a recognition that in this composable world, a DXP is going to be a little different for everybody. So there's not a one size fits all. If you're an e-commerce customer, your stack or your composable DXP is going to look a little different than if you're a more conventional marketing company or you work with partners or something. So I think when you see that recognition from these analysts, and you see customers that aren't always going to be the first to jump into a new technology, adopting it, we're reaching that tipping point where Composable is much more mainstream, and we just want to make sure that we have all the tools and the education for those companies that have to make that jump so that they have a good experience.
Well, and interestingly enough, so we talk about DXPs being composable. I can't remember who the quote was, but I think it was something to the effect of, for DXPs to be composable, companies have to become more composable too, because there are some maybe very large scale enterprises who act kind of monolithic, just the way they run things. And that ends up being an important part of the education too, right? That composable is a business philosophy as well.
Yeah, both. I mean, if you think about any complex system, there's going to be a certain amount of specialization, whether it's a business, like you don't want your HR team, doing the finance stuff. You don't want your liver doing your thinking, right? Like there's specialized organs for that do their job very well. And so I think it's a good analogy to a business where if you get too tightly coupled, if things get too complex, everything's going to slow down, right? And so in the same way that a well-optimized business has very defined roles and the interaction between those different groups is very clear, that's when everyone can move really quickly. And I feel it's the same way in a composable architecture where You say this person's responsible for this. This is responsible for this. This is our handshake, and then each can do what they do very well.
Yeah, I mean, we were joking sometimes about how it's like the equivalent of a big business having a meeting and everybody from the organization's in the meeting every meeting, whereas we have marketing meetings. We have, so yeah. Not that everyone's like that, but it's sometimes a better way to showcase how you're not that far off. We always joke you're composable-ish already. So this is Contentstack's Composable DXP in this screen. So I know we talked about the fact that legacy, monolithic thinking, one vendor for all the pieces. I would look at this and I might say, oh, this kind of looks like a Contentstack DXP, but it's different because of that word composable, right? Can you explain how it's a little different and how it actually benefits the customer?
Yeah, for sure. So what this diagram is showing is just kind of our evolution as we've added more products to our product offering. So at the base, that red hexagon is our headless CMS. So this was the first thing that we brought to market. We then layered on top of that a marketplace. What that will do is make it easier to integrate with other tools. So if you are using a DAM, be able to browse that DAM from directly inside the CMS. We then added to that our automation hub, which we'll probably talk about a little bit. This is our automation framework that helps you connect everything in your stack and automate your business logic. And then our most recent announcement, that green hexagon on top, is our front-end hosting solution called Contentstack Launch. So as we're adding these products, the way that I would think about the difference between a monolith and what we're doing is everything that we do is unopinionated and it's not tightly coupled. So for example, none of our customers today are using Contentstack Launch. They're using hosting partners like Vercel and Netlify. They're rolling their own. Some set of those customers, after we launch will be using our front-end hosting, but you're not basically required to use any of them. So I think about it much more like, rather than rebuilding a monolith, it's more like Amazon Web Services as an example. So they offer dozens of individual services, databases, CDNs. They don't all need to be used together, right? You can pick and choose which of those work best for you. There are certainly some benefits of staying within the family because the integration is easier. You only have one bill, you can get volume discounts, all that kind of stuff. But even as we built out our architecture, and we're on both AWS and Azure, we use some Amazon offerings, and then we've actually used non-Amazon offerings in combination with that. So we think it's really good for competition that we have partners, that we're doing our own stuff, but that you can really choose either. And that's the biggest difference between monolithic and composable DXP, is you can bring whatever it is that you want to solve the problem. We'd love for it to be our software. If it's not, we're totally happy to introduce you to a partner and have integrations to that.
Yeah, there's two things on this. The one you'll hear in this, I love analogies. I seek them all the time. But when I think of my beloved iPhone, if you bought an iPhone day one, that's going to come with mail, notes, text, all that stuff, right? But then it's more than enough usually. It's very good. But you can also go and get, if you wanted Evernote instead of notes, or different ways to kind of compose your system. But at least at base, you can, for the most part, go end to end with one company. And that leads me to the second piece. I sometimes hear that procurement in the enterprise can be a very lengthy process, sometimes up to a year in certain regulated industries. This might be a good kind of, I don't want to use the word hedge, but this might be a good way to work with that, right? You can go composable and maybe procurement is with one company instead of four.
Yeah, it's definitely, people can raise their hand if they love enterprise procurement. I can't see, but I imagine there's not a lot of hands going up. But yeah, those are both really good analogies, both the iPhone. You might use Contentstack Launch for your first project. You might find that it's not going to be as full featured as dedicated hosting providers. There may be a point at which you say, okay, I'm graduate over to this, or I'm going to have some projects using Contentstack, some using this. That's really the beauty of being able to do both. But if you need to move quickly, the last thing you want to do is involve yet another lawyer, start a whole nother procurement process. So we do give you the option of solving some of those problems, but as you can see in this diagram, there's still a lot of boxes that we aren't covering, and that's where those fantastic partners come in. But you can layer those on as you want. You're not trying to buy everything all at once, so that it won't take a year to procure it. And you can say, hey, let's get the first project up. Let's add personalization now. Let's add monetization now. You can just sort of layer those pieces on when it makes sense for your business to do so.
Absolutely. So we do have a question, but I'm going to hold it for a slide or two because it's an attempt to compare monolithic launches versus composable. So I want to talk a little more about Contentstack. I liked this one, this quadrant. Maybe it's magic, maybe it's not. But in this one, we want to break down these 4 quadrants and why and how Contentstack fits in that top right one.
Yeah, certainly. I can walk through this. So this is, as we were struggling with our graduation from just being a headless CMS to offering all of these other tools to help you compose. What does that mean? What is that category? How does that compare to a conventional DXP? And so we kind of charted it out this way. So in the top left, you've got the really big, heavy legacy DXPs, which are very prescriptive. They're very expensive, time consuming, at least in our opinion. In the bottom, you've got the bottom left, you've got the WordPresses and the kind of just dedicated CMSs. In the bottom right, you have pure headless CMSs. This is where a lot of our competitors are. And then in the top right, you've got kind of the breadth of what you can do with a DXP, but it is still composable. And so we're calling that a composable DXP. This is what analysts are starting to refer to it as. So think about it as more than just a CMS, but still completely composable.
Did you find that was a challenge in selling a headless CMS, is that customers might wrongly come to think of it as a DXP just because that word CMS was always used? And when you talk to WordPress or others like that, you come to think, oh yeah, it does all that stuff. Is that a piece to why maybe you build out the composable DXP the way you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge, and these terms evolve over time. And if you look at what people are actually searching for, they are still searching for headless CMS a lot. But what we were trying to decide is, hey, is this a brand new thing? And of course, you have challenges there because it's not a term of art, and people don't really know what you're trying to say. Or is this a version of what already was there? And what is good about a DXP is that you can do a lot with it. It's something more than a WordPress. But the downsides are some of the things we talked about, which is you're getting all of it, you're working their way. And so we thought, let's capture the composable aspect, because you can build it yourself, you can customize it, you can get all the benefits, but it also can now replace what you would get out of a DXP. So if you start with something like Contentstack, layer on some other partners, you're getting all the functionality of a DXP. And so it is more than a CMS, but it's also composable. So that's kind of where we landed because DXP is such a known thing, but this is very different in kind than what was conventionally called a DXP.
Gotcha. And I assume they're different competitors, right?
For which?
Oh, between if you're a composable DXP or you're a headless, it gets granular where there are different competitors in these grids, even though I think you said you kind of created this, right?
Yeah. This is kind of how we're thinking about it and our conversations with analysts. And again, it's a tricky definition because, analysts have come up with a definition for what a DXP is. And it's kind of defined by what was out there. So they just looked at the feature lists of, okay, what are the 3 leaders? And that's kind of a DXP now. And so as we're thinking about what do you have to do to be a composable DXP as opposed to a headless CMS, our opinion is that you also need to provide the tools to compose. So just handing someone a CMS and saying, here's our API documentation, go figure it out, we don't think is enough to justify being that center of gravity. And that's why we've layered on these other tools like Automation Hub, which are there to help you compose beyond just your CMS. And we think at that point, you have the right to kind of ascend to being considered a DXP because you're something more than just one skittle in a big list of little technology providers.
That's right. And that was a perfect segue because after this slide, we're going to go there to Automation Hub. But why don't we, this might be a hard question to answer, but I want to serve our audience here. How long can it take to launch with Contentstack over a legacy system? I know there's not a 6 weeks versus 18, but maybe just some of the things you've seen that show the acceleration in this sphere versus legacy.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's a difficult question because every project is different. Every team is different. We have many, many customers that are live on their first project within 2 months, which, is probably how long it takes to even get through procurement with some of the larger systems. So some of the things that we have to make that easier, one, it's cloud-based. So your team is in there on day one. We also provide a lot of boilerplate and SDKs. So we have these things called starters for basically all the major JavaScript frameworks. You can install that. It has connections into our APIs. It has our SDK installed. And so it's really just how quickly can your team lay out the website and build the content models. So it's going to vary for every team, but we do get a lot of people that come to us and say, "Oh my God, I'm end of lifed on my version of the monolith. I have 2 months to get it done," and we can often get them live that quickly.
Yeah, the dreaded end of life. You probably don't hear that as much in composable thinking. But now let's go to the Automation Hub. This, to me, is something that has really come on strong. And the thing I would ask you, is this both made possible and made necessary by composable thinking? After you tell us what an automation and Automation Hub is.
Yeah, I think I can answer both at once, or at least I'll try to, and you can keep me honest. So, one of the problems, we saw that diagram of hexagons with all the logos, right? They all need to talk to each other, right? You're not getting any value unless this piece of your system is talking with this piece of your system. So that could be as simple as an integration. You can install one of our marketplace apps and you have the integration. But what's really different is that things need to happen in a certain order, right? And I'll be the first to admit, one of the benefits of the monolith is you don't really need Automation Hub, right? So this is really comes about because of the nature of Composable, where you have all these different platforms. So what Automation Hub is, we were super excited to announce this last year, is a trigger and action-based automation framework that works both within Contentstack, but also with all of your other technology providers. So I can give you an example that will maybe make this a bit more clear. So imagine that you're an e-commerce company and you're managing your website with Contentstack. So say that somebody wants to add a new product. So you're adding a new pair of sunglasses. And imagine all the things that have to happen downstream of that. So you might add the original entry. You might need to translate it to 4 different languages. Well, great. We can ping out to Smartling and another translation provider, have it translated and come back. Then you need to move the workflow state into ready for review, right? So that can happen in the background. Someone can review it. You can have another trigger where if something moves from ready to review to complete, now I want to update my search index. So I can ping out to like Algolia or a search provider so that it can index all those different languages. Otherwise, that product's not going to show up in your search. You might also want to sync with your e-commerce provider so you can provide a link to the product page. You might want to sync to your DAM. You might want to send an email to the legal team, send a Slack. All of these things have to happen every single time a new product is added. And if that's a manual process where a human has to go do it, if they do it out of order, if they miss a step, then it can kind of blow the launch of the new product. So what Automation Hub allows you to do is set up those triggers and then all the actions that want to happen, and they all happen in the background. And the cool thing about this is you can also trigger one of these just by hitting HTTP endpoints. You can have a different system trigger an automation in Contentstack. So maybe your commerce team is working over here. You have a webhook that every time we change the price, I want to run an automation in Contentstack that keeps that price up to date or unpublishes the page if the inventory runs out, right? These are all things that you can automate, and it gives you the benefit of something like a big monolith with all this functionality without the drawbacks of having to write all this integration code, which can be very time consuming and costly.
In being a part of this transition, do you remember the point, or was everyone so smart that they knew this was needed? But do you remember the point where you went, "Oh my gosh, something like this is absolutely necessary in this world"?
Yeah, we got to cheat a little bit. I will admit to that. So the product that our team built before Contentstack was a product called Built.io. It was one of the first integration in the cloud frameworks. That product was actually sold to Software AG a couple of years ago. So this team had experience with integration in the cloud for a while. So we were very aware of the issue. We just wanted to adapt it to composable architectures. And so we were already experts. We just had to basically make the composable stack version of this cloud integration framework. And we also just, we heard it from customers. Like the one downside early on of going composable was you had to write a fair amount of integration code. You had to have the team with the expertise for that. And so that was a problem that we wanted to solve on behalf of our customers and not just say, here's our APIs. I hope you figure it out.
Yeah, it's like a tech version of range anxiety or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know you kind of talked, I think this is the one we actually.
Yeah, this was the
almost
example
talked
that I gave, but you can see all the different steps that potentially have to happen when all kinds of actions are taken. You can trigger it based on a new asset is added. I upload a photo, I add a new user to the system. There's all kinds of different triggers that might create a workflow for you. And so by running this in the background, you can really help your team move really quickly and make sure it's good for compliance too. Like if there's certain things that have to happen in a regulated industry, if I need to make a backup of every website when I change it, because if I get sued, I need to know what the legal language in the footer said exactly a year ago. Those types of use cases are really good for this.
Has this actually created like an automation manager job? Because it does seem like there's a lot of pieces to manage.
Yeah, I mean, you can do the majority of this code free, which is nice. So you can visually see, what the workflow is. You can have conditional branches and that sort of thing. If you do want to integrate with a legacy system, this is also, I should note, a good way to migrate off of the monolith, because what will happen is you'll often have both of the systems running at once because certain things are using the old CMS, certain things are using the new CMS. This is a really great way to keep those two things in sync, right? So that if a product changes here, you can also change it there. So no automation managers that I'm aware of yet, but I'll definitely keep an eye out.
Yeah, no, I think you brought up a good point there as well, in that enterprises, while they might use a legacy platform, they often have composable qualities to their organization. If they're a manufacturer, no one's going to say SAP is composable, but that is something that all those actions are done in a purpose-built system. They might have a PIM, they might have a DAM already. And so that can often be a way, you were saying it with the automation point of view, but that can often be a way to help move the composable conversation by saying, well, you have these pieces, let's kind of reorient, maybe make them a little more API friendly or work like that. And I think that ends up being a narrative to tell.
Yeah, and a lot of companies don't take the full jump to composable on day one. It's a transition. And so there is a period where you need to keep those systems in sync, and Automation Hub is a good way to do that.
Absolutely. We like to always say you don't have to go from an all-in-one to all at once, right?
Yeah.
All right. So as we talked about this newest product, you told us that maybe it's up against systems like Vercel or I think Netlify. When did it become obvious or a strong position to go forth with this product? And what do you hope will happen from it? I know it just started, so you don't really have customers on it yet, but what is your hope that will happen from this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this really came about because the analogy that we were thinking about was, imagine an alternate world where you go to a car dealership and you just buy the car and it has no tires on it. Like the tires are not made by the person that made the car, but it just kind of made sense that, hey, I can at least drive this thing off the lot. Now, somebody might want to add snow tires or racing tires or big knobby tires, and they can definitely do that. But should we really just be selling something that you can't even put anything live on the internet with? And so it really came about because we had both small companies and large companies where they said, hey, what do I do? What do I need to do to get this project live? And prior to launch, it was always, you're talking to at least 2 vendors. You're going to get the CMS and you're going to get a hosting provider. And for those companies that want to move really quickly, or even those smaller companies that don't want, to budget another $40,000 to bring on another partner, this is a really good fit for them. It's also really good just to get going quickly. So you can set up your development environments. You can start to the question of, how quickly can you get going? This really helps that day one, your developers can have a place to push code to. They can be sending it for review. So it started with, hey, this is a problem that customers have. It's not as feature rich as our partners that have been working on it for 5 years. Of course, we'll continue to add to it, but we think for a big subset of our customers that just need something that works. Apple is a good, that analogy that you talked about. Like, I still use the Notepad app, but I use Evernote for something completely different. This gives them that option of something that is very well integrated. So it's just a couple of button clicks, pull something in from GitHub, it pulls your environment variables over. So it just helps you get live very quickly. And in terms of where we're going with it, of course, we'll continue to add functionality and respond to our customers and what they want to see next. But that was really the genesis of it and why we're super excited about it.
Yeah, I think you hear the word accelerator a lot, right? So, what is this screen here telling us with the Contentstack launch?
Yeah. So this shows a little bit about the benefits, and this goes back to sort of the AWS example of if you stay within the family, there are benefits when it comes to setting things up. So in our case, we have this concept called stacks, which is basically where all of your users, your content, everything that's going to power a website, that exists in the CMS. You can now say, okay, I want this stack to correspond to this launch project. And what that will do is pull over the environment variables, the API keys, the environments, because we have a concept of environments in the CMS, and now we can match those environments in the hosting provider. So you can definitely set this all up yourself, either home rolled or with a partner. But this does give you the benefit of just with a couple button clicks, suddenly I have a front-end environment to deploy it to. And true to everything that we do, it is completely unopinionated on how you build this. So you can build it with Next or Gatsby or your own home-rolled JavaScript. It'll host anything. We don't want to be prescriptive in how your team can actually work and build their front end.
Very nice. So I ask the silly questions sometimes, but when we talk about the front end hosting, how does this, because I come from, as you do, originally from Monolith, but I remember the time where we would almost create a design in Photoshop or InDesign completely divorced from what it was going to look like on the site. And then it would be like a waterfall where that turns into front end and that gets placed on top of a CMS. How do these front end systems relate to how design is done today and on a composable platform?
Yeah, that's a complex question. So I think the design process is similar in that it starts kind of with the ideation and in design software, Figma or whatever it might be. I think what is changing is this ability to use Composable to kind of componentize things and be able to have multiple projects going on at once. So like as an example, we have this versioning system. So all of the assets and everything in your system are versioned. So you could have multiple different teams working sort of concurrently on different versions of a future campaign. It's not this waterfall where it's like design, build, test, deploy, design, build, test, deploy. You can have multiple of those streams going at once. And so it kind of breaks the traditional waterfall process of design through deployment because you can be doing multiple things at once. And then also, build up a component library. We have something called modular blocks, which are basically blocks of the website that are pre-designed that you can apply to and move around on different pages. So it changes the design paradigm a little bit, but definitely there's more agility than what you get when you need to, like I said, kick everyone out of the CMS and do like a 1.5 day deploy.
Yeah, and I can imagine that's one of the tougher parts of explaining these these updates in the marketplace to maybe legacy monolithic users who see Contentstack in the analyst reports as a great solution. And then you probably get those questions at the front where you realize how much explaining you're going to have to do, which you're happy to do. I know, but being on the front or on the vanguard of a lot of this stuff can, you have to bring things back down to such a simplified place sometimes, right? Like you have to go, oh, right. No, we're starting at that frame of reference.
Yeah, and we're actually publishing something soon, which I'm super excited about, which is what we're calling like a mock maturity model. And so it starts with nothing is composable, and it ends with I'm moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And it's a recognition of the fact that that is a gradual journey. And so we have at every stage, this is the key activities that your team is doing. These are the next things that you should be taking on. These are the things that you should be measuring, so that you can kind of chart on that process. Okay, I'm here, meaning I've added a few things, but like my whole mindset and my team hasn't shifted composable, and I want to get to the next stage. So what should I be doing? Okay, I need to decouple this. I need to add a particular piece of software here. So we're hoping that that will help customers understand where they are, where they can get to, and then just as importantly, what are the steps that I do between now and then? Because it is always a continuum. It's not like you just snap your fingers and suddenly, hey, I'm completely composable.
Yeah, and I even wonder what's next in the sense of, when we talked about cord cutting, for instance, right? It made a ton of sense at the beginning when the price points were what they were, when you had an internet connection and then Netflix came and you said, oh, it's one service. And then cable starts losing its share. And so, in some ways the cable providers like Peacock is a monolith trying to go composable, right? Like, and then you start adding up and now maybe people are paying more than they were on cable, and then bundling comes into play. And I wonder if, from your point of view, this wasn't a question we talked about, but like from your point of view, if you see there will be more, I don't know, best of breed bundlings for customers where they can realize the benefit of not having to, another car analogy, not having to go into 4 different car dealerships to test drive a midsize sedan in each of those, right? Like, what do you, as our last kind of question before I ask you a general one, but what do you feel about the next couple of years in that sense? Are there any things that you're kind of feeling are going to take place, consolidate, bundle?
Yeah, I definitely think we're going to see some amount of consolidation. I think another way that this is being solved a little bit is we're seeing with our SI partners is more agencies become experts in composable. They're helping kind of inform a stack for a customer, so they can say, hey, what are you trying to get done? And then rather than, okay, go shop for this, go shop for this, go shop for this, that SI has put together, hey, we've got a really good stack. It's Contentstack, it's Commerce Tools, it's Algolia, it's Binder. We've done 100 deployments like this. We have all of the integrations set up. So I think that's one way that it will be solved. Another way is, we're kind of doing some bundling ourselves by offering additional products. So if, we were Peacock, we now have the front end hosting. So now you can get Peacock and HBO for $12 instead of, Peacock for $9. So I think that's definitely going to happen because there are just a lot of options out there. And so we're trying to work with our partners to say, hey, you can be a little opinionated. If this particular company is trying to accomplish this, this is really a good stack, as opposed to accomplish this. There's a slightly different stack, but let's not put every single company through having to figure this out all themselves, because we've had enough swings at the plate. We've done this enough times that we can be a much better partner in recommending a stack that's going to work.
Yeah, no, that's a great thought there. So buy Peacock from Contentstack. No. How do you stay up to date on everything? Connor, what do you read? What's the first thing you open business related?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. Obviously, I've been reading you guys a lot and watching the Final Four bracket very closely. And I do think that third parties like you are going to be really important because obviously we're all going to say amazing things about ourselves, but we do need those sort of outside observers that are seeing the trends and helping customers navigate that, as opposed to just always getting our fluffy marketing. I do watch kind of industry-wide stuff, TechCrunch and the analysts. Obviously, we're shaping the conversation with analysts as we go. There's also the Mock Alliance, which is the main group for mock companies. So the great thing about the Mock Alliance is they're publishing content about how to compose, no specific vendor. So all of us are kind of interchangeable from their perspective. But they do a lot of thought leadership pieces. I sit on the Mock Alliance Thought Leadership Council, so we're going to create a lot of content there. And I would say that a really active place, if you're just trying to join into this really exciting composable movement, there's so much going on. Go look at some of the leaders and follow their founders or their heads of product on LinkedIn, because there's active discussions happening every day as we're defining what this means together. And so that you'll see debates, you'll see amazing product announcements from everybody. So that's really a great way just to kind of dip your toes into what's happening, because it's such a vibrant movement and there's so many really brilliant people working on it. I haven't always enjoyed being on LinkedIn as much, but since I joined this whole composable movement, it's been really exciting to see what happens there.
That is a great point. The amount of engagement that is authentic and organic and truly seems to me like good actors talking about this stuff and trying to figure out the best way forward for the customers and the ecosystem. Couldn't agree more. And we often do see more questions as the on-demand video of this hits, but I really do appreciate your time, Connor. This was a great walk through the current state, past, future state of Contentstack. And we wish you all the best in your March Madness Conobos bracket next week.
Final Four. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I always love coming on and talking about this, and happy to connect with anybody after this on LinkedIn or answer any questions that people might have. So please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.